The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
We are the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, HVERI for short. A lot of people know us from the 2018 eruption of Kilauea in the Lower East Rift Zone. Working under Hawaii Tracker on the Facebook group. Since then, we've been trying to carry on and take the lessons, the hard lessons that were learned during that eruption and try and prepare for the next major disaster that comes to our island.
Yeah, and so we do that through two different programs. One is volcano education, and the other part is digital resilience, which we address through online groups on social media. So the way the two programs work together is that the social media networks end up being a distribution pathway for all the information. And having that network in place means we can provide more than just volcano education, but any other preparedness information as well.
What we were working for really came about in the Mauna Loa eruption in 2022. Within hours of that eruption starting, we had the mayor, Mitch Roth, we had USGS HVO Ken Hahn on the stream trying to help flush out a little bit of the ongoing because it's so new. It's completely different from our previous major eruption, which was 2018.
One of the things that Talmadge and I were talking about was how do we deal with social media? It was something we needed to figure out and get right. Our job is to get information to the public and make sure that the public get it as well as possible and as correctly as possible. When Philip and Dane started coming to and live streaming the meetings, it was great because we were reaching more people than we normally would. So when the eruption actually happened, we had this relationship. The interviews we did during the eruption, the most fun ones were the ones with Philip and Dave because they were more relaxed, and we knew we were getting to the local community, and people were asking questions. So those were the best. I think I just want to really give a shout out to those guys and how we worked as a team on this eruption. It really worked out well, and we got to a lot of people we wouldn't have normally gotten.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from the nonprofit HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. Today is Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Kilauea is fairly quiet underground, similar to last week, but above ground we've had a smaller wildfire emerge near the eruption site. So that'll be a lot of what we talk about today. How you doing today, Dane? How's your last week been?
Doing pretty good. Liking the weather changes that we've been having, getting a little more tolerable, the temperatures down here in Lower Puna. But yeah, I've been interested with the fire following the eruption up by Nāpau Crater, which we'll be talking about more today.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a few images from the USGS. We'll talk about some of the history on that. And we'll see what else comes up with your questions, which we'll be collecting throughout the presentation here. Dane will be leading discussion on chat as usual. Mahalo for that, Dane. Lou helping out in the back end as well. And yeah, let's get into it, yeah?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, let me rearrange the screen as usual. And put up our volcano summary. Aloha, everyone. This is our Hawaiian Volcano Summary for October 10th, 2024. Kilauea remains quiet underground, but a small wildfire has flared up on the southern edge of Nāpau Crater, visible here, adjacent to the eruption site, which filled this part of the crater last month. The fire itself was captured starting on a webcam, the PW camera from the USGS. And here is a zoomed-in sequence showing the first plume of smoke and then some incandescence overnight from a couple of different spots, spanning on that western to southern side of Nāpau Crater in there. See, that was present even through yesterday. Last night, there seemed like there was some moisture that came through, and this morning, not as much fume was visible, although in some images more recently, it has been spotted as well. Besides these images of the fume on the southern and western side of the crater, we have some close-ups, such as this, which is showing what's actually burning in there. There's no continuous flame wall, but there is underbrush burning, largely the uluhe staghorn fern that's in this area. Underground, the volcano remains just as quiet as it was last week. These are the earthquake counts per day for the last month. So this is the buildup to the eruption here. When eruption begins, they drop off. The eruption lasts 5 days. And since then, earthquake rates have been just as quiet with no resumption of higher counts. Looking at the distribution of them, they're in a similar location to last week as well. That is with deeper earthquakes beneath the summit down to the base of the volcanic pile, as well as earthquakes on either flank of the rift zone, both the south flank, which we've seen moving fairly continuously, more so when we have intrusions and adjustments, but also north of the rift zone, as you can see here. If we look at our ground tilt stations, we can see that there's been variation in inflation at the summit. This is the Sand Hill station, whose blue component here often points to the Hale crater area. So that has been inflating more so in recent weeks. Nothing to the scale of what we've lost during the recent events. But you can see that the green component from the South Caldera was inflating a little bit earlier the week before that, and it has been more stable over the past week. So still filling the summit areas and areas that fed magma to the recent eruption. Down near the bend in the rift zone, we can see not a whole lot of change at the escape road station, where normally we see this dropping a little bit more quickly. It has been fairly stable over the last couple of weeks here. So perhaps still trickling in there. And finally, over at Pu'o'o Crater, there is still no indication of magma nearby in the rift zone there, but it does pick up the signal from the west, or it does seem to be tilting as that reservoir by Makaupuhi seems to be refilling. And to show you visually where that is, this is the latest INSAR image from the USGS showing where the dike opened, and it's really in this area right in here by the bend of the rift zone that we're seeing accumulation, with not so much signal from Pu'o'o itself or from the Nāpau Crater area right in there. So refilling where it lost magma at the summit and at the bend of the rift zone. Turning to Mauna Loa, earthquake rates are still quite low on Mauna Loa, but there has been a tiny bump in earthquakes that occurred yesterday, where we reached 9 earthquakes in that summit area. If we look at their distribution, we can see that they're fairly spread out and largely on this eastern flank, where we have two slightly larger events, magnitude 1s, along with a host of smaller events on that southeast flank. So in the grand scheme of things, looking at the last 5 years, that's not even a blip on these very low earthquake rates that follow the eruption in 2022. So Mauna Loa is still recharging as expected and nothing unusual there. And that's our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week. So with that, we will turn to our observations first this week. And I will start off by recapping and playing the summary video that the USGS released of this recent eruption the last 5 days. So this is a 1.5 minute video. We'll just let it play up here. It's narrated for you guys. So we'll let it roll here.
The night of September 15th, USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory geophysical data indicated that an eruption could be occurring in a remote area of Kilauea's Middle East Rift Zone within Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park. Scientists on a helicopter overflight the next morning confirmed that a small eruption had occurred between Maka'aupuhi and Nāpau Craters, covering about 4 acres with new lava. Magma was still active below the surface, and that evening, September 16th, the area began erupting again, this time at the base of Nāpau Crater. A line of vents erupted lava that covered about a quarter of the crater floor. By the following morning, September 18th, eruptive activity had greatly decreased, and the lava flows were no longer moving. But that afternoon, vents west of Nāpau Crater began erupting lava that cascaded down into the crater. Over the next 2 days, the eruption continued until it paused the morning of September 20th. In total, more than 156 acres were covered with new rock that erupted from a fissure system more than a mile long. Numerous eruptions have taken place in this area of Kilauea's East Rift Zone over past decades. Most lasted less than a day to about 2 weeks. But multi-year eruptions also took place. Looking at the bigger picture, this eruption signals a significant and fascinating change in activity at Kilauea.
All right, so that was a summary video from the USGS. And they have released a new summary map as well. So this is the final map of the entire 5-day eruption with final statistics. So first of all, we can place ourselves on the east rift of Kilauea. There's the bend right there. And here is Nāpau Crater with the eruption up in its west flank between Nāpau and Maka'aupuhi, and also spilling into Nāpau Crater over those grand lava falls that we saw. So the final statistics here. Let's zoom this in. The total fissure length was 1.1 miles, just over a mile, just under 2 kilometers. The longest flow was just under a mile, 0.9 miles, just over 1.5 kilometers. The full extent, 217 acres, mostly on that crater floor, but also up on that western rim. And the total volume, 2.9 million cubic meters, or 750 million gallons. So fairly small volume overall, but very spectacular, of course. So there is that map. And I always point out here as well, on this blown up image here, there is a Nāpau trail that comes from Maunaulu parking lot. And here's where it would split towards the overlook, which is still intact over here at the edge of Nāpau, and also towards a campsite. And there is a little bit of trail that remains, and the campsite and trail is covered right in there. So they mentioned lots of eruptions have happened in this area, and I thought it would be interesting to point out some of these. This is from a paper on a Kaumamoa eruption, showing here Nāpau Crater, and in this particular paper, the recent flows were the red ones from Kaumamoa in March 2011, right there. But it's also showing January 97, January 83, October 68, all these other dates here. And you can see these colored lines showing where the ground cracked open for each of these events. So the one we just had was slightly off the map, but was basically over there and in here as well. some very similar locations. So it's one of the usual suspects, we'll say, in this area of the rift zone. Now, why is this fire such a big deal, you might ask? And coming back to 2011, there is a connection here. So I'll pull us back to the map of the Nāpau fire in 2011. So as a result of those flows from Kamomoa that flowed to the south from that area, they sparked a wildfire that began on March 5th. And in that first week, you can see this kind of a grayish area right in there, burned 240 acres, and then progresses to the green, to the yellow. Then the wind picks up and it really fans 750 acres off in this direction over here before starting to fan out sideways a little bit here up until the 18th. Right? So there it is in total, that big fire that came through. But what you might note on here is that they have marked in green right here. I'm going to highlight it for you guys. The burn area from 2003. So there was an even bigger fire that occurred back in 2003, which I'll show you in just a minute. You can see it when it goes all the way down to the coast. This was when flows from Pool were burning a forest over here on this side and sparking that vegetation there. So there's the Nāpau fire. You can see that one was a large area there. And I found this image that goes back to 2003, the Luhi fire, which is that bigger event there. So there's Nāpau Crater. Right here, these little black lightning bolts are what they're marking as active surface flow. These are the ignition points, presumably, marked on here. So a couple on the edge of this zone. And this fire back in 2003 burned almost 5,000 acres. You can see all this big red zone right over here. There's a little patch down in here as well. And there are other wildfires like that predate this in the national park, sometimes down on a coastal plain. But really, this one is the biggest one that was of the largest concern in recent memory. And partly it's the hazard to park visitors, but longer term, it's the health of this East Rift rainforest that's very unique, has a lot of unique species, and is very vulnerable right here in the rift zone. So one of our valued park ecologist, Tim Tunison here is what he writes, and this follows a whole bunch of research on what happens after fires in Hawaiian rainforests. If that fire breaks and runs, a uniquely Hawaiian ecosystem will be forever lost. The native rainforest will turn into a weed patch. So it really is a new world out there. It doesn't just burn and recover like it used to. It's hard to allow the native plants the time that they need to recover when we have extra seeds and weeds around. And so what often happens is the forest does not ever truly recover from these fire events. And so this is why wildfire suppression is such an important topic, even though there are no houses or other infrastructure in the area and people can largely stay away from the smoke you'd expect. Still, that's really the importance of it there, is because of that. So given that, we can turn to what we're seeing now. This is the NASA Fire Information for Resource Management System, or FIRMS. You can see up here, this is what we turn to when we're looking for heat signatures from the satellites. And here I can zoom into Nāpau Crater, and you can see there is our heat sources. Yeah, some of this might be from some of the vents, maybe some skylights over that cooling lava channel, but certainly the fire as well here in this green area is likely one of these signals. So that's what we can say about the history of it and why this is so important. So interestingly, the USGS contributed here because in those previous fires, we did not have webcams pointed into the forest. So because of the webcams, we spot the plume of smoke fairly early. The report after the first day that I read was 84 acres, but I'm sure it grew since then. But it still seems fairly contained, like it hasn't spread at least yet. And the USGS noting here on Monday morning, October 7th, with a special status report that even though there was no eruption, there was an ongoing wildfire near the recent eruption area, visible in webcams. They note it began around 4 p.m. October 6th on the PW camera, and that they also saw in that area glow from the recent eruption site. However, they checked the monitoring signals, things like the tremor on the seismogram, and you did not see what you would expect if lava was actually still exiting the ground. So rather, it's likely just that remnant heat or some of these hot rocks got blown in, or the wind changed direction, or something dried enough next to the edge of the flow to finally catch fire and spark. That kind of thing happened by October 6th here. So they do note it's similar to the other plumes of smoke we saw during the eruption itself and during a fire on eruption in the eruption interval itself, right there between the 15th and the 20th. So that is the status report the USGS put out. The national park, in response, activates their wildfire suppression efforts. They close Maunaulu parking lot and connecting trails. They note 22 members of the Pacific Islands Fire Management Team, which also includes people from Hawaii Island and American Samoa, were constructing a fire line to try to control the perimeter. So besides fire line, the other control method here is helicopter water drops, and they're using Maunaulu parking lot as a landing area, staging area, and dip site for that water. So the closure was expected to last through yesterday, but I would not be surprised if they are still out there conducting operations, and perhaps our viewers can give us an update if any of you have been out there more recently than us. Interesting, it's been named the Makaupuhi fire here, and this is the important reason why. It's a threat to Hawaiian ecosystems and rare plants in the area. Because of the remote location and hazardous terrain, it makes suppression more difficult. So that's the park release there, and that's presumably still ongoing. The USGS has released a series of images on October 7th. We showed you this is the wider view of the edge of the crater there. You can see some burned vegetation, a lot of smoke, and a lot of green stuff. And if we zoom in, you actually can see the flames dancing in there. There's some more up here, some more over there, some dead brown stuff in here as well. But you can see to the right, it's a lot greener over here. Looks like there's a hapu'u fern right over the fire. So this is what it actually looks like. No giant wall of flame, just little patches. Things are smoldering and continuing to flare up out there. It's a little bit of a closer view of what that might actually look like. And zoom back out, looking to the north. There's Mauna Loa in the background. Here's the most recent eruption site right there. A lava falls poured into the crater right there. So we're all the way across on the southern edge. You see smoke all the way here, there, and all through here as well. It seems like it's a fairly wide zone that gets engulfed in smoke. A little bit lower angle, now looking from north to the south. And you can see there is that lowest rim on the north side of Nāpau. How it really gets taller on the west side over there. And close to full here on that southeast side. But here is where it was likely catching and sparking the vegetation of that fire, and one direction is likely that way. And you can imagine how that could catch through the forest with all this heat continuing to dry out that vegetation. Some of us might recall in 2018, that giant river of lava had one giant dry and brown side that was catching on fire, and an upwind side that was much greener because of the continuing support for life of that forest there. So really interesting. Similar kind of thing happening here. A little more localized, and you can see why they're being careful with it because of the history of huge fires sparked in this area. One final picture, and this is not so much of the fire. There is a little bit of smoke over here off the side over here, but we can see the recent eruption site, and nice image here. So let me zoom into, let's start back up here. There's that farthest up rift or part of the fissure. There's a little patch in the forest, I think, that you can't quite get to as easily or see as easily, but a larger spider rampart forming right here in the central portion of the fissure. And if I pan over to the left, you can see the remains of the Nāpau Trail coming in, and where the split goes to the overlook and towards the campground over this way, which perhaps in here somewhere there's one remaining campground, but most of the rest of it is underneath this flow right in here. It left a couple of kipuka. There's a little patch of trees right there, hardly anything there, and this little patch of ground, no trees, but it's a little bit more visible, sticking out of the flow right through here. An interesting channel. You can see how the channel had these higher banks, spillover margins, and then as the flow drained out, it receded and exposed the walls. You can see some of these overflow areas right through here. Right, there's the main channel, and when it was really flooding, it was swirling up in this area too and sloshing in a wider area. You can see there's a little bit of lava tubes happening right here. There's a little bit of lava tube emerging. Looks like maybe it comes in right there and follows something like that, forming some interesting features right in there. And when we come down to this area of lava falls, this big void area, and this is a good candidate for what we've been seeing glowing in the webcam over the last few weeks. So likely some opening into some hot areas in here. And the trail comes across this way. And there on the crater floor, there's another bit of a spatter rampart at the bottom of the trail, and a whole bunch of lava filling that crater floor. The overlook itself is somewhere right in here, I want to say. And where this trail heads off in that direction right there. And so it seems like the fire is still a ways off from there in that direction. But it does appear like there was some impact around this area here as well from the recent flow. Yeah. So those are the pictures we have, and of course the webcams are interesting. This is the original webcam view. I'll have to play that for you guys. And this is the not zoomed in version. You can see what it actually looked like in the full width. You can see the moon coming across and setting. There's a little bit of fume and flaring up right in there. So that's why we have it blown up, and I'll play the enlarged version once again. I'm showing you guys every frame. You see how that fire seems to creep around and it flares up in these further areas away. This is the 9th, so you still see some flare-ups. And then today, earlier in the day, by 2 p.m. or so, you really don't see a whole lot in there. But if I turn to the camera more recently, here's a 420 snapshot. You do see a little bit of fume in there. Here's eruption site off to the right, so a little bit of fume still approaching that area. And maybe if I reload this again, it'll give me a more recent snapshot, and perhaps it'll be better to see, or perhaps not. Maybe a little bit of fume in there. So not nearly as much, and hopefully it is dying off there. There is another camera, which is the S2 camera, the one we've been looking at the eruption and lava falls with. I'll play you this loop. The fire is once again mostly off to the left of the camera over here. You can see a little bit of how much is glowing on the crater floor. Not a whole lot anymore by the last few days here. Pretty dark. And a current view of the S2 camera. Earlier today, still see some steaming coming from the eruption site. And they're reporting no gases measured from there at all. And so by now, we've essentially lost all gas emissions and all glow from the eruption site here. And the glow we do seem to be seeing seems to be from the fire, and much more emissions from the fire as well. So besides the national park, fire suppression, usually the most important thing around here is the weather. The national park did mention it was because there's higher winds, low humidity in the area that helped the fire persist this long after the eruption site. And perhaps we see this decrease overnight last night because of this weather system that seems to have come in overnight. Here's the GOES satellite coming in, and it's hard to pin down exactly. I try to pick some things out for you guys. This is a rainfall summary from National Weather Service. And we don't have a whole lot of good data, but if we look at the island of Hawaii for the last 24 hours, And you can see, for example, Pahoa is showing 1/2 inch of rain. Mountain View is showing maybe 1/8 of an inch of rain. Glenwood is missing. Would be the most useful site, but it's the one that's missing. So there's been a little bit of rain in the area through here. There's also Weather Underground's Wonder Map, where you can look at people's individual weather stations around here. And so likewise, if you look at one in a volcano area, seems like weather rainfall came in last night. There was precipitation accumulation and rate coming in last night here on October 10th. And likewise, further down, this is down in Kalapana at the coast. Just try to see if we can get some averaging here. Doesn't usually rain as much down there, but they do see also last night to pick up in the rainfall rates as well. So it does seem like that maybe had a little bit of an impact, and that might be the most important thing moving forward to how long this fire might persist. That is ultimately what put out the one in 2003. So that is our observations here. And since we're talking about these emissions, we'll turn to our volcanic hazard summary. There really isn't a lot of gas coming out, but we will go to the forecast anyways from VMAP, the VOG Measurement and Prediction Project from University of Hawaii at Manoa. And the forecast model today looks like this. We only have 60 tons per day of SO2 coming out from the summit of Kilauea. And with the weather pattern, it's barely showing anything on the maps anywhere here, right? If anything, you might be smelling some smoke from time to time if this fire were to flare back up. To me, I believe I smelled smoke overnight because of the wind on that first night, but I have not smelled it since here in the volcano area, but others may have picked it up perhaps as well. So that's our hazard summary. Not a whole lot out there right now. If you are sensitive, certainly follow the park recommendations if you're nearby, and especially the smoke, you might want to close the windows as well. All right, so we'll take our mid-row break here. I'll turn it first to Lou to handle our community corner, and we'll come back in with our monitoring on the back half.
All right, so let's introduce Lou back to the stage. Thanks, Phil. We'll be rejoining you in a minute. Hey, Lou, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
All right. So you got a little community corner action for us?
Yeah, you know, let's see what I got here. Where did my screen go? I do have some stuff for us. There we go. That is a shot from Oahu last week. You can see Phil down in the bottom right-hand corner. I'll talk about that as soon as we go through our community corner. So we do have alerts and conditions happening at the park. Philip went through the fire and all that, what's going on. We have a lot of closures up there. The Nāpau Crater and campground is closed until further notice because of the eruption that happened up there. There's construction going on as well. I don't know so much about the yellow jackets anymore. That's just an ongoing problem at the park. And we know that there is no viewing of an eruption because that has ended. An event, there hasn't been the after dark in the parks going on up there, but they're starting to kick up a bunch of other programs. And I wasn't going to read this out of help or assistance to the interpreters, but pre-show Dano kind of encouraged me to do it. And so here you go, Dano. This is Ranger Dean, Bark Ranger Kahuku Day. It's paw-official. The wildly popular Bark Ranger program is coming to Kahuku. I couldn't resist, Dane. I couldn't resist. If you know Dean at the park, he's a great man, and he rescues these dogs. His dog, there's a greyhound. Kahuku is a great place to go down and do this. I have down there. It is on October 12th at 10 a.m. It's 4 hours. Go down there and enjoy that. They are having the hula arts at the park. That's on October 12th. That's a Saturday at 10:30 for an hour. Prepare for rain. It could rain up there. Prepare for walking because the parking is limited up there, and enjoy yourself. Another reminder from our friends at HACA that Get your pets ready because they're registering and scanning microchips. That's going to be happening on October 19th at the Cooper Center in Volcano, 8 to 12:30 p.m. Please take advantage of that if you live here. And the Pacific Tsunami Museum, I saw this pop up this week, and this is a great program that they have for the rest of the year. As part of the Pacific Tsunami Museum's Kama'aina initiative, all Hawaii keiki 17 and under will receive free admission for the rest of the year. That's for the rest of the school year. So that's pretty sweet. So Dane, you're good to go. No charge for you. And takes us to the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations. This was from the beginning when I started the photo that I had up there. Phil and I were lucky enough to get scholarships to go to attend this conference of Hawaii's largest annual gathering of nonprofit professionals. Because of COVID, there was no in-person. This was the first time in-person since COVID. It was a great day, a whirlwind for us, meeting everybody in the nonprofit world around here. A few from Hawaii Island, Maui, all through Oahu. So thank you to Hano for that. We appreciate it. And another reminder, if you are not subscribed to our newsletter, it comes out at the beginning of the month. You can scan that QR code, or I will put it in the chat in a little bit. Go over there and subscribe and check us out. All right, Dane, what do we got for some donations and some thank yous?
Yeah, appreciate it, Lou. Thanks for writing up the community corner there. We do want to take this opportunity to thank everybody that tuned in today. The likes, the subscriptions, the shares, all that stuff really does help on the back end with the algorithms. I know everybody says it, but it's true. And if you like this type of content, consider sharing it out as a way to support us. Another way that you can support us is we do take donations. First way is through Super Chat, but we prefer the hveri.org/donate option and tax-deductible donations because we are a 501c3 nonprofit. What was the term now, Lou? Community?
Come on.
No, you're the one that went to the lecture.
A community-driven organization.
There you go.
Yep.
All right.
Which we are.
And with that, we also like to thank the Hawaii Community Foundation and the County of Hawaii for their support through the Puna Strong and Kilauea Recovery Grant programs. They really help make this type of content possible. And not only that, but our other programs as well in digital resilience, as well as our new youth development. So we appreciate them, definitely. And I think that gets us through our mid-roll section.
It sure does.
Questions in the chat for Phil, but let's go ahead and add him back here. Thank
All
you,
right.
Lou.
You're welcome.
All right. There we go. Welcome back, Phil.
Yes. Hello. Thanks for that. Should we continue and do some monitoring signals and then do the questions, perhaps?
Yeah, I really don't have any questions in the chat for you that I'm seeing. Let me go check one last spot, but
I do see Yvonne reporting that it's still closed, the parking lot at Maunaulu. Thanks for that update.
But yeah, let's just continue on, and then if there are questions, we'll catch them at the end.
All right. So let's turn to our recent earthquakes. And looking island-wide, this is the last 2 weeks plotted in color by depth. So let me pop up the key since I haven't done this in a while. The deep ones are in blue, the shallow ones are in red, and the ones in between are in orange, yellow, and green, essentially there. So we see the deep ones all by Pahala, as usual. We see our Kilauea cluster. We'll zoom in on that in just a second here. And we do see some adjustment earthquakes here on the east flank of Mauna Loa. So perhaps there is some adjustment happening in response to Kilauea's many actions here in the last couple months. So there also have been a couple shallow ones over here on the south side of Mauna Loa, but nothing large enough or in a pattern that would cause concern. It just seems to be the usual adjustments and settling that happen in the long term. We see a lot of these blue ones spread all across the island here. This is kind of background settling of the island on the seafloor, so that's all normal as well. I pull it back to just the last 2 days, you'll see that that shrinks quite a bit. It's largely Kilauea, Pahala, and Mauna Loa. Right? The other events are kind of sporadic, but when we put a big bucket like 2 weeks, it can catch a good amount of them here. And zooming into Kilauea, let's enlarge that area here. And what you can see is that we have this cloud close to the rift zone right through here, and then this cloud that's south of the rift zone on the south flank for the last 2 weeks, showing that continued adjustment. The interesting thing has been the summit earthquakes have been a little bit deeper than usual. We've had more of the yellows and less of the reds than usual. And this public-facing map, which catalogs every individual event, has a threshold where it doesn't count lots of the small micro earthquakes in here. So when we look at our other map, we'll see more yellow than this, but here's a pattern of them as well. If we just go back to the last 2 days, you can see that that's pretty slow as well. And across the volcano, it's actually happening pretty slow, as you see here. So turning to the earthquake map, that's now plotting them by time. So now our key is that the last hour is red, the last day is orange, and the last week is yellow. And so here is across the last 7 days on Hawaii Island, and that whole range. The newest ones we've had have been 2.1s down here in Pahala, 2.3 earlier up here, also pretty deep underneath Pahala zone, 2.1 right next to that one as well. The largest ones, if we sort it that way, there was a 2.7 that highlights that cluster in here with a couple of 2.5s, one offshore Kona deep, one within Kilauea caldera itself, 5.5 miles down. So there's the highlight of those big earthquakes are coming in about 2.5 magnitude. If I come back to the last day once again, then not a whole lot going on. The most recent event in that zone is a 1.7. Pretty slow earthquake-wise. So turning to the full monitoring data with the maps. First, let's check in on USGS's most recent daily update from this morning. And there are no surprises here. It's very similar to what we saw last week, apart from a wildfire that began south of Nāpau on September 15th, continues smoldering at this time, with wildfire smoke and incandescence sometimes visible in the webcams. Earthquake rates are low, gas emissions are low, no gas is being detected from the rift zone. All of that is similar to what we saw before. And most importantly, in their analysis, they do still say that an arrest still continues at low levels in the Middle East rift zone, even though deformation has decreased since. Data shows magma is continuing to move at a low rate from the summit to the Middle East rift zone. And because of that, future intrusions and eruptions could occur. So that is the prognosis from the USGS currently. And we can look in more detail at some of the charts. So looking at the ground tilt first, up at the summit at Wikahuna for the last 2 days, we're too zoomed in to really see a whole lot of meaningful thing here. So it is wiggling a bit, but very small scale, not so useful today. Over the last week, we see a lot more of these wiggles, and overall, not a whole lot of net change really from the beginning to the end of the week. So let's zoom out even more to the last month. And now we can see that all those little wiggles are just little small variations within a small trend of slightly rising that follows a small trend of slightly lowering that follows a longer trend of rising that followed the eruption. So it seems like the initial pulse of recovery, and here's the actual eruption itself from the 15th to the 20th, recovers a little bit slowly, a little bit faster, more so, and now it's a little bit more stable than it was during the first 2 weeks following that eruption, but still seems to be doing something, likely filling different areas of the summit reservoir. And we can get to that by looking at some of the other tilt graphs. Kilauea doesn't tell us a whole lot different from what we just saw at the summit. Sand Hill, we talked about in our summary, how we do see that similar rising pattern from Maunaulu more recently, but it was rising last week over to South Caldera, and it's flatter this week. So there is that migration of inflation centers over the weeks that we're referencing here. Further on at Escape Road, not a whole lot of meaningful change, although as I mentioned, kind of flatter than you'd expect, considering the previous trend coming down. So that could be an area of slow filling via that Maunaulu bend, site of the recent intrusions that preceded our eruption. And at Pu'o'o, there's eruption once again. That initial recovery, it seemed like it had gotten flatter and stopped adjusting there in that Middle East rift zone last week, for example. But within this most recent week, it's showing a little bit more life, tilting from that west direction, Makapui Reservoir. So what really matters is west of here, and at Pu'o'o itself, the rift zone segment nearby is still decreasing pretty steadily, deflating, with only a little bit of change that followed the earthquake and then a little bit of a rain as well. And further down the rift zone at Jonica, you just see the shaking from the earthquake and flat line besides that. Nothing else to see there. So we've seen the tilt. We want to put it up against the earthquake rates. So despite all these little wiggles, inflation, deflation over the last week, we don't really see any corresponding pattern of earthquakes. Maybe this is too bucketed. So depth versus time, you see a little bit of flare-ups. So it could be that you're seeing a little bit of pressure building and then flaring up in some little part and causing a little bit of inflation or a little bit of deflation. But it's all so small compared to the grand scale of change that's been occurring that we don't need to overanalyze those little wiggles. What really is interesting is just the pattern of clustering that you get as time goes on, flaring up as pressure builds. So here is the last week, and there is more of that yellow with the microquakes plotting at the summit area. Our rift zone component with a little bit of the north flank adjustments as well, and our healthy south flank movement here. Right? And today we actually see more south flank extension all the way down to lower east rift zone as well. So not the rift zone itself, but the flank. So it's normal for it to be adjusting and moving, but we do watch that because if let's say there were to be a big earthquake over here, then that could open it enough to cause magma to flow in that direction. And someday, but no signs of anything like that happening now. All clear on a lower east rift. Okay, there's our cross section. And what's interesting here, if we look at that area under the summit, is this continuous stack of earthquakes from down at the base of the seafloor prior to the volcano all the way up through, and it's actually coming a little bit into the red here. So the entire column seems to be shaking as it's refilling and adjusting in there. And that's the only thing I'll point out from the cross section today. So for the last month, we looked at Uekahuna. There's this wiggle. We looked at the Sand Hill Station, earthquakes over time. We saw that extra yellow dots showing up in those deeper earthquakes under the summit right here. That's still continuing, maybe with a few extra gaps, but still ongoing here. And we're seeing the shallow period still pretty active, but nothing like preceding the eruption itself. So really our most telling graph might be this one, where we're still at quite low counts after the event. You might recall that in some of their most recent intrusions, even the Southwest Rift eruption, we saw earthquake rates pick back up again within hours, if not days. So here we are going weeks where we still haven't recovered. So we really did a lot of work this last eruption to make more space underground. And so we're recovering a little bit slower here. Over the last year, earthquakes per week, you can see we're still low. And that's that similar pattern. And when we turn to earthquakes per month, we really don't see a whole lot here, apart from what September registered, similar to August, but lower than the July earthquake swarm and intrusion. So overall, the pattern you can see has still been one of increasing seismicity and action as we have a very healthy supply of magma into our volcano from down below. Like whatever that faucet or hose looks like, you can imagine something that spigot's all the way on. And that's what's dispersing through the shallow parts of the volcano and pushing here and pushing there and popping out here or there. And that's what we're trying to keep track of as we're scurrying around on the surface of it here. So those are our monitoring signals. We often look at GPS as well from the USGS, but we still have a data outage on the website for those stations. And so like we have done in the last couple of weeks, we'll check in on a couple of key stations from the Nevada Geodetic Laboratory GPS map. And first one is Puhimau. And we've selected these stations because they have very recent installations, and so we can actually see the data on these automatic plots. So Puhimau is a station in between the summit and the bend in the rift zone, and it's usually monitoring that dynamic between a summit and a rift zone bend. What we can see is that it is moving to the east a bit and to the south, so being pushed to the southeast while not really rising a whole lot. So it's getting the signals from the summit swelling and pushing to the southeast. So right now it seems like the magma is also building in the summit, and near summit areas, that's the most important thing. But perhaps there is some other alternate pathway that also is feeding to the rift zone, or is feeding enough that feed both the summit and the rift zone, because at the station MMAU, that is, let's show you the map of where this actually is. So we showed you the Puhimau station, that is, I believe, this one. It's gonna show it for me. Yeah, there's Puhi. Next, I'll show you MMAU, I believe it's this one right here, right north of Makapui. So we'll go to that one next. We'll also, after that, go over to near Nāpau at the KERZ. And finally, we'll go all the way down to our KAR over here, south, downrift of Pu'o. So we showed you Puhimau. Now let's come to the Makapui station over here, and we'll zoom it in because it's really tiny pink dot, hard to see. But over the last several days, all these dots are plotting one on top of the other, so really not a whole lot of change east-west. Similar with the north-south component, not a lot of change north-south. But it is still showing what appears to be uplift. So it is still rising in an area by Makapui. So this is the most convincing signal there that there is still swelling happening in that area. If we go further east of here, not too far, to right next to Nāpau, where the fissures actually were, we look and see that there we're moving to the east and not so much north or south. You can see we're coming in steady there. And not so convincingly moving up or down. It seems like we're more stuck in a cloud that's on average flat there in a recent period here. So really localized to this area. And if we're looking at this station, has uplift, but this one doesn't, then there's some blockage right in there somewhere, right? Which makes sense if we're not seeing any signal at Pu'o as well. And to our final station, RKAR, it looks like this. Just within the scatter, everything looks completely normal and nothing unusual happening there. So all that's backing it up, and as we pointed out earlier in the summary, that's corresponds to where we see the INSAR image showing the dike opening further west from the actual eruption site underneath the rift. Right, and so this area that is showing subsidence in that map is likely the area refilling. Right, and we saw South Caldera first a little earlier in the week, last week, and then now more so the main caldera area. So those are our monitoring signals for Kilauea over this past week. And that wraps it up, apart from Mauna Loa, which we'll touch in on here as well. Over the last week, summit seems to be increasing a little bit, but not a whole lot, and perhaps within these normal cycles that we see, daily cycles, and sometimes we see biweekly cycles as well. So here are earthquakes, depth versus time. Here are our cluster of recent events that occurred yesterday where we had a spike of 9 earthquakes. There they are, right there in that little cloud compared to, you see there's 3, there's 0, there's 2, there's 2, there's 3. So that's what that bar chart ends up looking at, is how many fall in that little window. And it happens that there were a handful there. But overall, not a whole lot of change. Here's our long-term tilt, slightly above flatline. And looking at earthquakes depth versus time, here's our little flurry that just came in yesterday. Not that impressive compared to what we've seen before, and just slightly above what we've seen over the last month. There's what that spike looks like, 9 earthquakes per day there. But we'll zoom it out to the last week, and not even the highest week within this year, and zoom it out to the last 5 years, and there it's really not even showing up in earthquakes per month. Here's what those maps look like for the last week, last month, last year. And I thought maybe more impressive was to look at the actual cross section. So this is now depth versus longitude. So like this longitude right there corresponds on a map to that same line right there, right? So here's our cluster of red earthquakes right there. They spread out in a map zone, but when we flatten them, they appear to all be in this little cluster right here. And it looks like something a little bit shallower, and then maybe along the base of that southeast flank. And so a couple of releases and then movement of the flank, something like that. A very, very minor event, and maybe in response to Kilauea, but probably hard to pull apart from its regular adjustments it's got from refilling as well. So that is really it on Mauna Loa. There's that cluster for in comparison for the last month. And for the last year, it doesn't really stand out as anything unusual. It's just one of these many flank events that you see over here on the right of the graph. So that is it for Mauna Loa as well. And we'll just check in on one last item, which is whether the USGS has released any more news since we have started broadcasting.
Spoil that for you and say no.
Yeah, answer is no. So yeah, let's turn to some questions, Dane.
All right. So yeah, we don't have any questions. We do have a couple donations though that came through. We wanted to highlight real quick through our HVERI.org/donate. First one was from Nathan, $25 donation. I appreciate that, Nathan. And then Edward came through with a $40 donation, and appreciate all that support there. If you do want to make a donation, we do take those on the HVERI.org/support, and that is where we like to take donations, just because then we can get your tax deduction letters things in order. Whereas on YouTube, it's easier, but it's a little bit more expensive, and yeah, it is what it is. We appreciate everybody who donates and supports us, though, in any way, shape, or form, including like, subscriptions, and shares. With that, I'll do one final scan of these rooms just to make sure that we don't have any questions, but I just did not see any questions today. It's kind of quiet up there.
Yeah, just as well. So here we are. Maybe we'll cut it off here right as we approach the 1 hour mark. And yeah, thanks, Dane, for leading that discussion on chat. Thanks for our loyal viewers catching us live, and for all of you guys who have busier lives and catch us after the fact. Mahalo to you as well. Appreciate our ASL interpreter team, Dano and Carrie. Mahalo as always, helping us be accessible to our deaf community. And of course, Lou on the back end, jumping in with our mid-roll as well. Thanks, Dane. Unless something pops up, we'll see you all next week at our usual time, Thursday at 5 p.m. Hawaiian time, from our community-based organization, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. I'm Philip Ong, Dane DuPont. Mahalo, everyone.